Jacob Fatu is behind bars. Let me say that again so that every single person watching this video fully absorbs what I just said. Jacob Fatu is behind bars in a prison cell right now as you watch this video. The most physically terrifying, most unpredictably violent, most genuinely unhinged superstar in all of professional wrestling today is sitting in a cell because of what happened after Smackdown went off the air last night. And the man who started it all, the man who lit the fuse on this entire catastrophic, unprecedented, absolutely insane chain of events, is Drew McIntyre. The Scottish Warrior walked into Smackdown last night with a plan so bold, so reckless, so spectacularly dangerous that everyone who witnessed it backstage is still struggling to process what they saw. Drew McIntyre put handcuffs on Jacob Fatu, and Jacob Fatu made him pay for it in the most savage, most violent, most career-threatening way imaginable. And then the police showed up, and now Jacob Fatu is in prison. And WWE, the entire company, is in a state of absolute chaos that nobody has any idea how to resolve. Comment right now if your mind is completely blown. Share this video to every wrestling fan you know immediately, because what happened after Smackdown last night is the most jaw-dropping, most consequential, most genuinely unbelievable sequence of events this business has ever produced, and the entire world needs to know every single detail. This is Ring Rumble 1, and we are going all the way in on this story right now. Let's start from the very beginning, because to understand how Jacob Fatu ended up in a prison cell, you have to understand what Drew McIntyre was thinking when he decided to do what he did. And I want to be very clear about something. What Drew McIntyre did last night was not impulsive. It was not a heat-of-the-moment decision. It was not the Scottish Warrior's famous fire and passion overriding his better judgment in a moment of emotional overflow. This was calculated. This was planned. This was Drew McIntyre sitting down, probably over multiple days, and arriving at the conclusion that the only way to deal with Jacob Fatu is to remove his greatest weapon before the fight even begins. And Jacob Fatu's greatest weapon is his freedom, his ability to move without restriction, his ability to unleash that catastrophic supernatural physicality in any direction at any time without warning. Jacob Fatu unrestrained is a force of nature that no human being on this planet has demonstrated the ability to fully contain. He is too big, too fast, too strong, too completely unafraid of pain to be stopped through conventional means. You cannot outmuscle Jacob Fatu. You cannot outpace him. You cannot intimidate him, because Jacob Fatu does not process intimidation the way normal human beings do. The concept of fear simply does not operate in him the way it operates in everyone else.
So Drew McIntyre, brilliant, calculating, desperate Drew McIntyre, decided that if you cannot stop Jacob Fatu through combat, you remove his ability to fight altogether. You take away the freedom of movement. You put him in restraints. You reduce the most physically terrifying superstar in WWE to a man whose hands are literally bound behind his back. It was the most audacious, most dangerous plan anyone has ever attempted against Jacob Fatu. And for approximately 30 seconds, 30 of the most breathtaking, most surreal seconds in Smackdown history, it actually worked. Drop your thoughts in the comments right now, because I need to know, did Drew McIntyre's plan make sense to you? Was this genius, or was this the most reckless thing the Scottish Warrior has ever attempted? Because I have been going back and forth on this since last night, and I still cannot fully decide. Share this video right now, because this debate needs to happen at full volume across every wrestling platform immediately. Here is how Drew McIntyre got the handcuffs on Jacob Fatu, and this is the part of the story that reveals just how thoroughly the Scottish Warrior had prepared for this moment. He did not attempt this during a match. He did not try to restrain Jacob Fatu in the heat of open combat, where the Samoan Werewolf's reflexes and instincts would have made the attempt not just impossible, but suicidal. Drew McIntyre is brave, but he is not stupid. He waited. He was patient in a way that goes against everything we know about his personality. Because when the stakes are high enough, Drew McIntyre can suppress his instincts and operate with a cold, strategic patience that rivals anyone in WWE. He found Jacob Fatu in a moment of transition backstage, not completely off guard. Jacob Fatu is never completely off guard, but in a moment where the angle, the approach, and the element of surprise created a window, a small, rapidly closing window, and Drew McIntyre went through it without hesitation. He moved with a speed and a precision that came from having rehearsed this moment in his mind 100 times. The handcuffs went on, both wrists locked. And for that brief, extraordinary, genuinely shocking window of time, Jacob Fatu was restrained. The look on Jacob Fatu's face in that moment is being described by everyone who witnessed it backstage as something they will never forget for the rest of their lives. Not panic, not fear, not confusion. Those are human responses, and Jacob Fatu in that moment was operating somewhere beyond the human. The look on his face was something colder and something more terrifying than any of those things. It was the look of a man whose mind had already skipped past the present moment and was calculating, with absolute certainty and absolute calm, exactly what was going to happen next. Not might happen, going to happen. Because Jacob Fatu, even in handcuffs, even with his wrists bound behind his back, knew something that Drew McIntyre had not fully accounted for. Handcuffs bind your hands. They do not bind your will. They do not bind your legs. They do not bind your head. And they absolutely do not bind the kind of primal, animalistic, completely unstoppable physical force that Jacob Fatu generates from every single part of his body simultaneously. What Jacob Fatu did next, with his hands cuffed behind his back, is the single most frightening display of raw physical power this business has ever witnessed. He went after Drew McIntyre with everything that his body could generate without the use of his hands. And the answer to the question of how much damage Jacob Fatu can do without his hands is enough. More than enough. Devastatingly, career-alteringly, blood-chillingly enough. He used his body as a battering ram. He used his size and his momentum and his complete regard for his own physical safety as weapons that made the handcuffs irrelevant within seconds. Drew McIntyre, the man who put those handcuffs on, became the primary target of the most restrained and simultaneously most unrestrained assault in Smackdown history. Restrained literally, unrestrained in every other possible sense. Jacob Fatu dismantled the Scottish Warrior with a ferocity that turned that backstage corridor into something resembling a disaster zone. Equipment scattered, set pieces damaged, production staff running in every direction to get out of the path of destruction, and Drew McIntyre absorbing every single second of it, because when Jacob Fatu decides that a specific human being is going to feel everything he has, there is no hiding from it. There is no surviving it cleanly. You can only endure it and hope that something stops it before it goes too far. And here is where it went way too far. Someone called the police. Whether it was a WWE official, a production staff member, a security guard, or someone else entirely, somebody in that building made the decision that what Jacob Fatu was doing to Drew McIntyre had crossed from professional wrestling altercation into something that required law enforcement intervention. And they made that call, and the police came. And when law enforcement walked into that backstage corridor and found Jacob Fatu, still in handcuffs, still unleashing devastation on Drew McIntyre, the situation escalated into something that WWE has never experienced before in its history. Law enforcement does not negotiate with Jacob Fatu the way a referee does. Law enforcement does not apply the same framework that governs a wrestling show. And Jacob Fatu, operating at this point on pure instinct, pure adrenaline, pure primal fury, did not immediately respond to their presence the way a reasonable person in a reasonable situation would. The details of exactly what happened in those moments between police arrival and Jacob Fatu's eventual detention are still emerging, but the outcome is not in question. Jacob Fatu was taken into custody, transported, processed, and is currently sitting in a prison cell as a consequence of what Drew McIntyre's handcuff plan set into motion. Now let's talk about what this means, because the implications of Jacob Fatu being in prison extend in every direction simultaneously, and none of them are simple. First, what happens to Jacob Fatu's WWE career? Can WWE continue to feature a superstar who has been arrested? What are the legal ramifications of what occurred backstage at Smackdown? Is Drew McIntyre pressing charges? Is WWE cooperating with law enforcement or attempting to manage the situation quietly and internally? These are questions that do not have clean answers yet, and the uncertainty around them is creating a level of institutional anxiety within WWE that nobody who works there has experienced before.
Second, what happens to Drew McIntyre? Because while the Scottish Warriors' plan ultimately led to Jacob Fatu's arrest, it did not protect him from the consequences of provoking the most dangerous man in WWE. Drew McIntyre is not okay. The damage inflicted on him during those minutes in that backstage corridor, damage delivered by a man in handcuffs, which somehow makes it even more disturbing, is significant. The Scottish Warrior wanted to neutralize Jacob Fatu. He ended up in worse physical shape than the man he was trying to restrain. Was it worth it? Did Drew McIntyre accomplish anything by getting Jacob Fatu arrested? Or did he simply provoke a level of violence from the Samoan Werewolf that exposed just how completely beyond normal human parameters Jacob Fatu actually operates? Comment below because I genuinely want to know what you think. Third, and this is the part that I think is being completely underestimated in the immediate coverage of the story, what does Jacob Fatu's arrest mean for the power structures of WWE? Because Jacob Fatu does not exist in isolation. He has connections, he has relationships within the roster that run deep and complicated. His absence, whether temporary or extended, creates a vacuum.
And in professional wrestling, vacuums do not stay empty. They get filled, quickly, by whoever is positioned and motivated enough to step into the space left behind. And given the current landscape of WWE, given the Vision and Roman Reigns and Seth Rollins and Paul Heyman and every other power structure operating simultaneously, the space left by Jacob Fatu's absence is going to attract attention from people with very specific and very dangerous agendas. Smackdown has never been more volatile, the backstage environment has never been less controlled, and the Scottish warrior who started all of this with a pair of handcuffs and a plan is lying somewhere nursing damage inflicted by a man who was literally restrained at the time. Drew McIntyre wanted to end the Jacob Fatu problem. Instead, he created something larger, more complicated, and more dangerous than anything he could have anticipated. And now Jacob Fatu sits in a prison cell, which should feel like a resolution, but somehow feels like the beginning of something much, much worse. This is Ring Rungle 1. Like this video right now if this story has you completely overwhelmed. Share it everywhere because this is the most extraordinary thing to happen in WWE in years. And tell me in the comments, when Jacob Fatu gets out of that prison cell, what happens to Drew McIntyre? And is there anyone in WWE who can protect the Scottish warrior from what is coming? Because the Samoan Werewolf is behind bars right now, but bars do not hold forever, and Drew McIntyre better hope that whatever comes next, he is ready for it.